let's look at one possible way of creating a modular pillar kit. So in this situation, in this corridor that I've been working on, I need to create some sort of pillar separated into a modular kit so it can be used in different scenarios throughout this level. I have a temporary pillar placed in here, so I need something that will fit nicely into this theme and also be used in places such as the end here, and further along we have much larger versions where that has different options to support, say, the beams at the top. And also I think I'll add some crumbled versions, so broken versions of the pillar, and this will help when it comes to set dressing or different kind of scenarios. I want some damage where this light shafts come through here, so I probably will damage the pillars as well. So basically I want to make a little kit for myself that has multiple uses. Now this is by no means the best way of creating such an object, but this is quite a fast and easy pipeline, and it's one that I use for a lot of my objects throughout this level and other things I make. Okay, so the first thing to do is to gather some reference so we can kind of get an idea of what we want to create. A good tool to use for reference gathering and reference displaying is a little program called PureRef. Now, PureRef is free to download, and you can install it into an external hard drive or thumb drive so that you can save this file into your reference folders and take it with you wherever you're working from. You can see I have a lot of reference gathered here for various aspects of the level. Everything from textures to exteriors, reference textures that I've taken myself to concepts I've gathered from online, interior and exterior. So we have in this folder some pillars that I've found on sites like ArtStation and Pinterest. Save them into this folder here, and all we need to do is select them and drag them into PureRef, and it'll organize them. And then if we hold Control and Alt and left mouse button, we can scale them up, and just left mouse button to drag and place them where we want. I'm going to scale these smaller ones up to useful sizes. And you can move the window of PureRef around just holding left mouse click. So it's middle mouse to zoom as well, and middle mouse to pan around the canvas. And you can right click the canvas and go to mode, and you can have this in different options like always on top, so you can always see your reference. That's useful especially if you don't have a second monitor to use. Now I'm just going to leave mine in the background so I can click on it whenever I need to have a look, or other than that I'd rather have it on a separate window so it's not obscuring any of my UI. And so here I've gathered a few different pillars, concepts and models. Some real, some realistically textured, but mostly they're all in a kind of Darksiders / World of Warcraft style. As my environment is kind of a mix in between Overwatch and World of Warcraft. I don't want the pillar to be super detailed. Probably something close to this. Various sections so that I can pick and choose depending on the height of the pillar. Top and bottom caps, maybe a separate cap for the top in case it's holding, say, some beams or something, and maybe one section that has a little bit more detail. So looking at these, I would say the closest to what I would like to make is probably this one and this one here. Okay, so in this Maya scene, I have the door and a mannequin model, and these two are going to be used to use as reference for height and correct scale of the pillar. Okay, so this mannequin is from UE4 and it's about 2 meters tall, about let's have a look here. We can see I've got my grid set up, and we can see that this mannequin is 200 almost 200 units, so 180, so about 6 foot tall, and the doorway and wall is almost twice as tall as the mannequin. So I'm going to start off with a cylinder, and we already have the grid unit set up, everything snaps to the grid, and we'll want these pillars to snap to the grid also. So we'll start with a cylinder, and holding X to snap to grid, I'm going to drag this out, and that looks about the right size. Actually, I'm going to do it a little bit bigger than that. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, and then holding X to drag up. And we want this subdivision access to be, say, 16. I like to, if I can, with the subdivisions of a cylinder, to make sure there's a cross section, so it can be separated into 4 equal parts. Makes it a lot easier for modelling down the road. Little changes and stuff is a lot easier if you can separate or split a model in half perfectly. In terms of subdivisions on a cylinder, most of it depends on whether you can see the edge, the silhouette, directly, like straight onto a cylinder. You can't see the subdivisions when it's smoothed. You can only really see the polygons and the simplicity of it when you can see the silhouette. And for this, you will be able to see the silhouette because it's going to have a base and a top. Now I could keep the middle sections quite simple and just add more polys to the base and the top, but I'm not 100% sure how this pillar will be used yet. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to make sure it has a good number of radial subdivisions. Okay, 24. It's still pretty low poly, but I think that will be adequate for what we need. Okay, so if we go into the side view, just see, I think we need one section to be at least 100 units tall. That way 3 of them will be the full height of the door. Okay. And then I'm going to snap hold D and X and move down to snap that pivot point to the grid and the center of the pillar there. That way they can be placed on the floor or on top of each other and be perfectly aligned. I might want a slight curve to each one of these sections to just make it a little bit more cartoony. So if we go on the multi-cut tool and hold Control, you'll be able to see the entire loop. And then if you hold Shift as well, you can snap to a percentage of the edge. And then double click that to select the whole thing, and then just scale it out a little bit just to create a tiny curve. And to make this a little bit smoother, I'm going to Shift left click and go to bevel edge, and then put that on 2 sections and move the fraction up. Now if this is moving quite fast, you can hold Control and it'll move it at a much slower percentage, and you can see that's just slightly curved this out. Maybe I want a bit more of a curve than that. I'm going to make this a bit bigger, and again Shift right click, bevel edge, 2 segments, and there we go. So we have a slight curve to that now. And I'm also going to bevel these edges so they're not 90 degrees. This, first of all, it adds the aesthetic that I'm going for, nice chunky edges. It helps when it comes to taking this into Zbrush, and also adding that edge will help with the normal maps and will also catch just a little bit of light when it's in the editor and make it just look a little bit more detailed. Okay. And then I want another version of this that's half the size. So I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to move it up so I can see it in conjunction with the one below. And first of all, I'm going to delete the edges I've just put in. I'm going to go to Vertex, select the top and bring that down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 50 units. You can see my blue squares is 100 units, or 10 units should I say. So this is 5 units. And you can change your grids by going right-clicking grid options, and you can see you can set your length and width of the overall size, grid lines every 100, and subdivisions of those grid lines to 10. And then your colours for your grid. I recommend setting these colours to something other than the wireframe colours so that when you have stuff selected it doesn't blend into the grid. Okay, so again, multi-cut, cut one in the centre, double click your edges, shift right click, bevel, turn the fraction down, segments to 2. Actually, I forgot to extrude this. Okay, so it's a bit of a curve, and then shift click, bevel, segments 2. Okay, there we go. Back to perspective, and we've lost our bevel at the top there, so I'm just going to drag this down to add that back in. Okay, so that's 2 segments done, and these can be repeated. And they'll snap to the grid and they'll snap to each other nicely because it's all modelled to the grid and the pivot's in the correct place. So now we've already got some sort of modular pillar set up here. So the next thing I want to do is create the base for the pillar. So I'm just going to go to cylinder again, snap into the grid by holding X. I'm going to drag this out. This time slightly bigger than the pillar. And I don't need to snap the top to the grid as it's going to be intersecting with the pillar wherever it's placed. Okay. And I'm going to set this to 24 as well. Now, as the radius of this gets out, the polygons are going to be more and more obvious, so you have to be careful. You know, if we extrude these, you can see that becomes lower and lower poly, and you can see those individual polys in the silhouette much more clearly. I think we'll be fine as it is. So I'll just undo that extrude. Yeah. Always check that you've not done hidden extrudes or bevels or splits, because when 2 edges are over the top of each other, it's very easy to not be able to see it, and it's common for that to sneak through right up to the point where you're sculpting or unwrapping or texturing something and you realise there's an error because you've got 2 pieces over the top. A good way of removing things like that is selecting your vertexes and welding them. Merge vertexes, just to delete interfaces like that. Okay, so let's have a little look at our references again. So again, I don't want anything detailed, I just want a slight taper to this. I'm just going to isolate this select the top. So I'm going to select that center vertex and hold Control and F10 or Control and F11. Select the faces. Get back out of isolation, and I'm just going to make this so it just comes a little proud of the main pillar, and then put a cut in here. I'm making this up as I go along. I'm not sure if I'll like this. Sometimes it takes multiple attempts to get something that you like, and that's because I've not made a concept. If I was going to do this as a more detailed pillar and I had a bit more time to spend on it, maybe it's for a portfolio piece or for a proper game, then I would probably take the time to do a concept. In a company, you'd probably get a concept off someone anyway. In a studio, you'd probably get a concept off someone to follow. If you're making something for a portfolio piece, I suggest making a concept from some reference. You don't need to be a fantastic artist. All you need to do is, you could kit bash one together, you could take some references and chop them up and put them together, or just give yourself a very simple diagram. But it's a lot easier when you are following reference and not just making it up. But I wanted to do this entire scene in around about a week, which means creating concepts for every single piece takes a little bit too much time. So I'm going to try and do a rounded edge here. It's at a weird angle, so that makes it a little bit harder to do. But using the scale tool and moving each edge, can kind of get something like this. Okay, and now I'm going to add another segment here, but I want it to round between those two edges. So what I'm going to do is go to the multi-cut tool, and then toggle on edge flow, holding Control and Shift to get the center there, and adding an edge. It will try to interpret the flow of the curve based on the previous two edges. I want to be careful not to create something too detailed, as generally the rest of the items in the scene are really low poly. I'm just going to bevel the bottom as well. And I'll bevel the top. And I just want the whole thing to just stick out a little bit further, and also be a little bit chunkier. So if I go into side view and select all the vertices, smooth off these as well. It still feels a little bit fiddly. This is meant to be kind of medieval. So what I'm going to do at this point is model the rest of these simple sections up, and then we'll move on to the other pieces that I need for this modular kit. Okay, so we have the main pieces of the pillar modelled. So at the moment we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pieces. I want all this to be on a single texture sheet, a 2K texture sheet. Now, the more pieces we have in this kit, obviously the lower resolution that each piece is going to be, because it's going to be smaller on the UV channel. Now, you could tackle this by texturing them using tiling textures, trim sheets, but The problem with that is it doesn't allow me to really do some personalised sculpting on each one, which is what I really want from this. I want each one to have sculpting detail in it. But for now, we're just going to create a couple more pieces. This is really going to be quite a packed UV island. These are going to be quite low resolution, but I want a few of these versions of these that are smashed, broken. And I'm probably going to do 2, maybe 3 pieces of smashed pillar. We'll do these 2. And I will just do these 2. I think that's enough for now. Okay, so normally when you're taking something like this, when you create a base model and take it to Zbrush and do a lot of sculpting, you would then retopologize that piece. So you would draw the polygons, a low poly mesh, directly onto the high poly sculpt, conforming to all the different details that you've put in there. But that is a stage that I kind of want to skip, so we're going to try and get these as close to the sculpt as possible. And the sculpting details that we put on these pieces are going to be limited, so not too deep. For example, one of these pieces here I want to have a pattern on, maybe some skulls or something like that, and it would be nice to have these with the topology so that you could see the details from the side in the silhouette, but that takes quite a bit of time, and I don't really want to spend that much time on it, so we're going to do with just doing the sculpting details and then baking directly to it, and trying to keep the sculpting details not too protruding so they bake nicely. So because these are going to be damaged pillars, I need to chop off some edges and get them kind of close to what the final result will be. And we can do some edits afterwards, after we've done the sculpt, but we want to try and avoid a full retopologization. So the first thing I'm going to do is put this on an angle, and then using the cut tool, I'm going to start cutting off some chunks of the mesh, and I'll just speed the video up here. Okay, so we've got the damaged pillars now. Some big chunks. This is kind of the general shape. I'm not really going to deviate much from this in the sculpt. I've also made a little piece here that can be placed, scattered around the edge of the broken pieces. So the next step now is to quickly unwrap these. I'm not going to be super neat with the unwrap because of the shape of these. They're not going to unwrap completely square to the grid. So I just want to get kind of close and I'll be happy with that. So I'll grab my UV shells and quickly lay them out. So at this point I'm going to go through each of these pillar sections and unwrap them. I want to keep it as simple as possible, which will probably be chopping the top and bottom off each section and trying to unwrap the radius as flat as possible. Now when you unwrap something, a cylinder of this shape, because it's got a slight curve to it, it will be curved in the UV editor. So then I'll take each of those sections and create a cylindrical unwrap. Unwrapping them like this will cause a little bit of distortion, but this is easy to fix, or at least get to a point where it's not noticeable. I'm going to view the checker map on these so I can see the distortion. So I can unwrap these by cylindrical. That way we'll keep it kind of flat. And then if we select the shell and then just use the scale until the checker plate are all even. And it doesn't have to be exact really, but as close as I can do it. Then once I'm happy with that, I can just move those off to one side and we'll sort the overall scale out later. Okay, and move on to the next one. So I'm just going to put my initial seams in, top and bottom, and then a seam all the way up the side. Just remove the ones that go into the centre, and then shift, right click, cut, select that shell and unfold it, then select the centre one, and then create from cylindrical. Okay, and then double click that in UV mode, and again just checking that these checkers are even. That's actually come out really nicely. Okay, and with the top pieces just click unfold, move them across, move that across. Okay, and then what I'm going to just do is work my way through the rest of these using the same technique, and then we'll carry on from there. we need to make sure they're all of a similar scale so that the details on the texture will be even across them. So we'll pick one. Okay. Just select this one shell, and then we'll go to transform and go down to get that size, and then we'll select everything. And set everything to that same size. Okay, so all the tops and everything and all the sides, everything is of actual scale now. And then we'll lay that out. Just make this slightly bigger in case I want to use the little rock at different scales. And we'll set the padding to be lower. Tools, modify layout, and shell padding down to about 5, and apply, and lay them UVs out again. So the tops and bottoms don't need to be quite as detailed, so we can get these side pieces a little bit more space by selecting all these and just scaling them down a little bit. While they will have a lot of texture information on them, they're less likely to be seen than the sides, so I'm going to just scale them right down. Too much. Okay, and then select everything else. Select everything. Lay that out. Okay. These and just make them a little bit bigger and lay that out. You can often get better packs by laying it out by hand, and then you can choose each piece individually and scale it up depending on the importance and how much texture space you want that piece to have. So for example, I know there's going to be one with a little bit of sculpting detail in it, so I could give this a little bit more room. I might do that actually, so I could just move these down. This here, and then just scale it up. Room for this somewhere else. It looks pretty neat. I think it's going to be okay. So make sure you save your work. Next thing I'm going to do is get these ready for going into Zbrush, so I'm just going to lay them out in what we call an exploded view. The reason we separate them like this, because it makes it easier to sculpt in ZBrush, but also, although we'll be separating in ZBrush anyway, so that doesn't really matter, but when it comes to texturing it and baking it, it's a lot easier. Or to bake stuff in a simple way in Substance Painter, it's easy to explode them like this first, so that the baking cage doesn't intersect the other items, so it doesn't cause any shadows or cross baking across each piece. I'm just going to cut that last bit. Right, so once you've separated all your models, select them all, and I'll export selection, and I want to put this into Pillar, and I'm just going to create a new folder and call it LPJ and Pillar all. Oh, I've exported this XBF. Just going to change that to OBJ. Right then, so now we're ready to go into ZBrush with these and begin the sculpting phase.